What happens when Hollywood's most beloved gentleman meets late-night television's most notorious provocateur? You won't believe what unfolds when Tom Hiddleston sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a light-hearted promotional interview. This isn't your typical celebrity chat. This is the explosive confrontation that has the entire entertainment industry talking and social media absolutely erupting. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two titans clash in what becomes the most uncomfortable television moment of the year. The stage was set for disaster from the moment Tom Hiddleston walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live set. What should have been a routine appearance to promote his latest project quickly devolved into television chaos that nobody saw coming. The tension was palpable from the very first handshake, and by the time the cameras stopped rolling, Hollywood was left picking up the pieces of one of the most shocking confrontations in late-night history. The evening started innocuously enough. Hiddleston, impeccably dressed as always, strode onto the stage with his characteristic charm and that disarming smile that has won over millions of fans worldwide. The audience erupted in their usual enthusiastic applause, completely unaware that they were about to witness something that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. Kimmel, sitting behind his desk with that familiar smirk, seemed ready to pounce from the moment his guest settled into the interview chair. Tom Hiddleston. "Everybody?" Kimmel announced with exaggerated enthusiasm. But there was something different in his tone tonight. Something sharper. Something that hinted at the storm that was brewing beneath the surface of this seemingly normal late-night setup. The first few minutes proceeded as expected. Kimmel threw out his typical softball questions about Hiddleston's latest project, his preparation for the role, and the usual celebrity small talk that audiences have come to expect. But anyone paying close attention could sense the undercurrent of tension building. Kimmel's questions had an edge to them, a subtle aggression that seemed designed to unsettle rather than entertain. "So, Tom," Kimmel said, leaning back in his chair with that trademark grin that somehow managed to look both friendly and predatory at the same time, "I have to ask you about something that's been bothering me. You've built this whole image as this perfect gentleman, this Shakespearean actor who can do no wrong. But come on, nobody's that perfect, right?" Hiddleston, ever the professional, maintained his composure with a gentle laugh. "Well, Jimmy, I think we all have our flaws. I certainly don't claim to be perfect." "But that's just it," Kimmel pressed, his voice taking on a more aggressive tone. "You never slip up. You never have a bad day. You never say the wrong thing. It's almost like it's all an act, isn't it? This whole nice guy persona?" The audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the playful banter they were used to seeing on late-night television. This felt different. This felt personal. Hiddleston's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly, clearly trying to steer the conversation back to safer territory. "I think authenticity is important," Hiddleston replied carefully, his British accent adding weight to each measured word. "I try to be genuine in my interactions with people, whether they're fans, colleagues, or interviewers." "Genuine?" Kimmel scoffed, and the sound echoed uncomfortably through the studio. "Come on, Tom. We both know that's not how Hollywood works. Nobody gets to where you are by being genuinely nice all the time. What's the real story? What are you hiding?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time since sitting down, Hiddleston's diplomatic facade began to crack. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and his hands, which had been relaxed on the armrests of his chair, began to clench slightly. The audience could feel the shift in energy, the way the atmosphere in the studio had suddenly become charged with an uncomfortable electricity. "I'm not hiding anything, Jimmy," Hiddleston said, his voice remaining calm but carrying a warning edge that those familiar with him would recognize. "I simply believe in treating people with respect and kindness. Perhaps that's a concept that's become foreign in certain circles." The subtle dig didn't go unnoticed by Kimmel, whose eyes narrowed as he leaned forward in his chair. The pretense of friendly conversation was rapidly evaporating, replaced by something much more sinister. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every micro-expression, every subtle shift in body language that telegraphed the growing hostility between host and guest. "Oh, I see what you're doing," Kimmel said with a laugh that contained no humor whatsoever. "The passive-aggressive British thing. Very classy, Tom, very dignified. But we're not buying it here, are we, folks?" He gestured to the audience, who responded with uncertain, scattered applause that felt more obligatory than enthusiastic. Hiddleston straightened in his chair, his professional mask slipping further as Kimmel's attacks became more pointed and personal. "I'm simply here to discuss my work, Jimmy. If you'd prefer to turn this into some sort of personal attack, perhaps we should reconsider how to spend our time." "Personal attack?" Kimmel's voice rose with mock indignation. "I'm just asking the questions that everyone's thinking but is too polite to ask. You know what I think? I think you're probably one of those actors who's completely different when the cameras aren't rolling. I bet you're not nearly as nice as you pretend to be." The accusation struck like a physical blow, and for a moment the mask slipped completely. Hiddleston's eyes flashed with genuine anger, though he fought to maintain his composure. The audience was now completely silent, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented, something that was spiraling far beyond the bounds of normal television etiquette. "That's quite an assumption to make about someone you barely know," Hiddleston replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet that somehow carried more menace than any shout could have managed. "Perhaps you're projecting your own insecurities about authenticity." The studio fell into complete silence. Even the production crew seemed frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this unprecedented confrontation continue to unfold. Kimmel's face flushed red, his trademark smirk replaced by something much uglier, much more real than his usual television persona. But this was only the beginning. What happened next would push both men past the point of no return, transforming what started as uncomfortable television into something much more explosive and career-threatening. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Kimmel recovered from Hiddleston's pointed response about projecting insecurities. His face had gone from flushed to pale, then back to an angry red that seemed to spread from his collar upward. The host's hands gripped the edge of his desk so tightly that his knuckles had turned white, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a venom that shocked even the most seasoned members of his production crew. "You know what, Tom?" Kimmel said, abandoning any pretense of professional courtesy. "I've been doing this show for years, and I've interviewed hundreds of celebrities. Most of them at least have the decency to be real with me. But you sit there with your perfect posture and your fancy accent, acting like you're somehow, above all this, like you're too good for American television." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Hiddleston's entire demeanor shifted. Gone was the diplomatic actor trying to navigate an uncomfortable situation. In his place sat a man who had clearly reached his breaking point, his eyes now blazing with an intensity that made several audience members shift nervously in their seats. "Too good for American television?" Hiddleston repeated slowly, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "Jimmy, I've appeared on American television countless times. I've always been respectful, professional, and grateful for the opportunity. But what I won't do is sit here and allow you to attack my character based on nothing more than your own apparent need to create drama where none exists." "Oh, there's the real Tom Hiddleston," Kimmel exclaimed with savage glee, pointing an accusatory finger across the desk. "Finally, the arrogant British actor who thinks he's better than everyone else shows his true colors. This is what I've been waiting for." The studio audience was now completely silent, many of them looking around uncertainly as if seeking an exit from what had become an increasingly uncomfortable situation. The usual energy of a late-night talk show had been replaced by something much darker, much more volatile. Even the band members had stopped their casual background conversations, all eyes fixed on the unfolding disaster. "You want to know what's arrogant, Jimmy?" Hiddleston said, his voice rising for the first time since the interview began. "What's arrogant is inviting someone onto your show under the pretense of promoting their work, then using that platform to launch personal attacks based on nothing more than your own prejudices and assumptions. What's arrogant is thinking that your position as a host gives you the right to tear down guests who have done nothing to deserve such treatment." Kimmel's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Oh, please, spare me the victim act. You Hollywood types are all the same. You love the attention when it's positive, but the moment someone asks you a real question or challenges your perfect image, you fall apart. Is this how you handle all criticism, Tom? By throwing a tantrum?" "A tantrum?" Hiddleston's voice was incredulous now, his composure finally beginning to crack in earnest. "Jimmy, I came here tonight to discuss my work, to engage with your audience, and to hopefully provide some entertainment. Instead, I find myself subjected to what can only be described as a character assassination based on absolutely nothing. If asking for basic professional courtesy is throwing a tantrum, then perhaps we have very different definitions of professional behavior." The host leaned back in his chair with a smug expression that seemed designed to inflame the situation further. "You know what I think this is really about? I think you're upset because someone finally called you out on your act. All this gentleman stuff, all this charm and politeness, it's just another performance, isn't it? And when someone sees through it, you can't handle it." "My act?" Hiddleston's voice cracked slightly with emotion, and for a moment the facade of control slipped entirely. "Jimmy, everything I've said tonight has been genuine. Every response, every attempt to redirect this conversation towards something constructive. That's not an act. That's me trying to salvage something positive from what has become an increasingly hostile situation." "Hostile?" Kimmel's voice rose to match his guest's intensity. "You think this is hostile? This is just honest conversation, Tom. Maybe that's something you're not used to in your rarefied world of Shakespeare and costume dramas. Maybe you need someone to tell you the truth for once, instead of just kissing your ass because you're famous." The words hit like a physical blow, and Hiddleston actually recoiled slightly in his chair. His hands, which had been clasped in his lap, now gripped the armrests of his chair with white-knuckled intensity. The transformation was remarkable. The composed, diplomatic actor was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely hurt and increasingly angry. "The truth?" Hiddleston's voice was now shaking with barely controlled emotion. "The truth, Jimmy, is that I've spent my entire career trying to bring dignity and respect to this profession. I've worked hard to earn my place in this industry, not through manufactured controversy or cheap shots at other people, but through dedication to my craft and respect for my colleagues and audiences. If that somehow offends you, if basic human decency is something you find threatening or fake, then perhaps the problem isn't with me." The studio had become a pressure cooker, the tension so thick it seemed almost visible. Camera operators continued to film, though several looked uncomfortable with what they were capturing. The audience sat in stunned silence, many of them looking like they wished they were anywhere else. This had gone far beyond entertainment into something much more raw and personal. Kimmel's response would prove to be the final straw, the moment that would push this confrontation past the point of no return and into territory that would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. "You know what, Tom?" Kimmel said, his voice dripping with contempt as he leaned forward across his desk like a predator closing in for the kill. "All this talk about dignity and respect. It's exactly what I expected from someone who's never had to work for anything real in his life. You went to fancy schools. You had connections. You probably never had to struggle for anything. And now you sit here lecturing me about professionalism while acting like you're too good to be questioned by someone like me." The accusation was so far beyond the bounds of reasonable discourse that the entire studio seemed to gasp collectively. Several audience members actually stood up, looking toward the exits as if sensing that they were about to witness something that would cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed. The camera operators exchanged worried glances, but continued filming what was rapidly becoming television history for all the wrong reasons. Hiddleston's reaction was immediate and explosive. He shot up from his chair so quickly that it rolled backward several feet, his tall frame towering over the desk, as his carefully maintained composure finally shattered completely. "How dare you?" he said, his voice shaking with fury. "How dare you make assumptions about my life, my background, my struggles? You don't know anything about me, Jimmy. You don't know about the years of rejection, the countless auditions, the times I worked, multiple jobs just to pay rent while pursuing this dream. You don't know about the sacrifices, the uncertainty, the moments of doubt that every actor faces regardless of their background." Kimmel seemed taken aback by the intensity of the response, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. "Oh, please, spare me the sob story. You're Tom Hiddleston. You've been handed everything on a silver platter." "Handed everything?" Hiddleston's voice cracked with emotion, years of frustration and hurt pouring out in a torrent that seemed to surprise even him. "I've earned every role I've ever gotten through hard work, preparation, and dedication. I've never asked for special treatment, never demanded anything beyond the opportunity to do my job well. And I certainly never used my platform to tear down other people for my own entertainment." The words hung in the air like an indictment, and Kimmel's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, and what might have been a flicker of shame before settling back into defensive hostility. "You think you're so much better than everyone else," Kimmel snarled, his professional mask completely abandoned now. "With your perfect manners and your Shakespearean training. Well, let me tell you something. This is my show, and I'll conduct it however I want. If you don't like it, there's the door." The challenge was unmistakable, and Hiddleston met it with a steady gaze that could have melted steel. For a moment the two men stared at each other across the desk, the tension so thick it seemed to crackle with electricity. The entire studio held its breath, waiting to see who would blink first. "You're absolutely right, Jimmy," Hiddleston said finally, his voice now deadly calm. "This is your show, and you've just shown everyone exactly what kind of person you really are. You've demonstrated that you're willing to attack a guest's character, make assumptions about their life, and create controversy where none needed to exist. All for what? Ratings? Personal satisfaction? The cheap thrill of trying to tear someone down?" He began moving toward the front of the desk, his movements deliberate and controlled despite the obvious anger radiating from every line of his body. "Well, congratulations. You've succeeded in showing your audience who you really are. I hope it was worth it." "Where do you think you're going?" Kimmel demanded, his voice rising with panic as he realized his guest was preparing to leave. "We're not done here." Hiddleston turned back with a look of such withering contempt that several people in the front row actually flinched. "Oh, we're very much done here, Jimmy. I came here tonight as a professional, ready to engage with you and your audience in good faith. Instead, I've been subjected to personal attacks, character assassination, and behavior that would be inappropriate in any context, let alone on national television." He began walking toward the stage exit, his stride confident despite the obvious emotional toll of the confrontation. "I won't stand here and allow you to continue this charade. I won't pretend that what just happened was acceptable, and I won't enable your behavior by participating in it any longer." Kimmel, realizing that his show was about to become a complete disaster, made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "You can't just walk out. This is live television." Hiddleston paused at the edge of the stage and turned back one final time, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence of the studio. "Jimmy, the fact that this is live television makes your behavior even more inexcusable. Millions of people just witnessed you attack a guest who came here in good faith, make unfounded assumptions about their life and character, and create hostile confrontation for no reason other than your own apparent need for drama. He straightened his jacket with deliberate precision, every movement a study in controlled dignity despite the circumstances. I hope your audience remembers this moment. I hope they remember what they saw here tonight when someone with a platform decided to use it to tear down rather than build up, to attack rather than engage, to create controversy rather than meaningful conversation. The silence that followed was deafening. Not a single person in the studio moved or spoke. Even Kimmel seemed frozen, apparently realizing for the first time the magnitude of what had just transpired. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every second of what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about moments in late-night television history. "Good night, everyone," Hiddleston said, addressing the audience directly rather than the host, who had so thoroughly betrayed the basic principles of hospitality and respect. "Thank you for your time, and I apologize that your evening was disrupted by this unfortunate display." With that, he walked off the stage with his head held high, leaving behind a studio full of stunned spectators and a host who sat in shocked silence behind his desk. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the theater until a stage door closed with a definitive click that seemed to punctuate the end of one of the most explosive confrontations in television history. Kimmel sat alone at his desk, the weight of what had just happened beginning to settle on his shoulders as the reality of the situation became clear. The show would have to continue somehow, but everyone in that studio knew they had just witnessed something that would have consequences, far beyond a single night of television. The confrontation that had started with subtle provocations had ended with a complete breakdown of professional courtesy and a dramatic exit that would be replaying on social media within minutes. The silence stretched on as America watched, knowing they had just witnessed the moment when Jimmy Kimmel's reputation began to crumble under the weight of his own making.